Welcome to Backyard Cigars. So glad that you could join me once more because today I want to talk about Spanish tobacco. Well, I want to talk about Macanudo's Emissary Espana Robusto, which I have in my hand. We're going to take a closer look at it. But I want to talk about Spanish tobacco. There is Spanish tobacco in this cigar. How much? I don't know. But it is interesting, and lately I've noticed that a lot of cigar makers are using rarely used tobaccos to sort of pique our interest. This is a trend that really started nearly a decade ago, or perhaps a little more than that, when you had CAO introducing that Brasilia, and you had Gran Habano using Colombian tobacco and Panamanian tobacco. And then, of course, back to CAO using Italian tobacco. And, of course, also using Colombian tobacco and even making a cigar that primarily had Colombian tobacco in it. So you see this trend, and now it's moving in the direction where legendary cigar men like Eladio Diaz are going within their own homegrown tobacco in Dominican Republic and looking for tobacco varieties that have never been used before or rarely used from the Dominican Republic. So not just rarely used tobaccos, but tobaccos from within regions that we are familiar with, but just simply varieties that we haven't tried, and giving us a different profile and perhaps a different smoking experience. Let's take a closer look at this cigar. So this cigar line, Macanudo Emissary Espana, was released March 25th of 2024 as a regular production line. And this particular Vitola, or format, as Eladio Diaz would say, is priced at $14.99. I actually got a good deal on it and got it for about $2 less. Now, these usually come in boxes of 16. And let's talk about the specs, really. I mean, this is a 5x52 Robusto. And the wrapper is a Connecticut Broadleaf Claro, aged 5 years. The binder is from Condega, Nicaragua, 6 years old. The filler is Colombian tobacco, aged 5 years. Nicaraguan ASP, aged 6 years. Dominican Piloto Cubano, aged 5 years. And then, of course, the one that pretty much lends the name to it, right? Spanish Havana Seed tobacco, aged 10 years. Grown in Rio Lobos, Spain, which is located in Cáceres, and that area is known for having rocky soil and a Mediterranean climate, as pointed out by General Cigar and Macanudo, which is why olives and peppers are also grown there. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but yes, it is a nice looking cigar. I can't tell you that it's not, because it is. And the band is, let's just bring it up here, Emissary. An emissary is a diplomat, usually is a diplomatic representative sent out to negotiate or to accomplish a mission. And let's see if this cigar accomplishes its mission. You have to excuse my hands. I've been working pretty hard on a renovation project, and that's what happens. Okay, so a little geography here. So we know that most of 95%, to be exact, possibly a little more, most of Spain's homegrown tobacco is grown in this region. They call it the Extremadura region. Extremadura region, which is near Portugal's borders and has the rocky soil that we were talking about, right? There's Madrid. Now, I looked on Google Maps and I scoured Google Maps in the satellite and I zeroed in on Rio Lobos to find out where they're growing this tobacco. And this is what I came up with. In the town of Rio Lobos, which is a very small town, there's this small patch here, and it certainly looks like there are rows of tobacco here. And of course, I could be wrong. It could be anything else that's growing here. But I checked in the whole area, and there really wasn't anything else in specific that looked like a tobacco crop. Now, if this is in fact the tobacco crop that is being grown there, it is a very small crop, as you can tell. This is not going to yield a lot. But because this isn't normally used, this type of tobacco that is, I'm sure there's an abundant amount that has been put away and aged, which is why you have the ability, as General Cigar does, to put 10-year-old Spanish Havana Seed tobacco in this cigar. And we don't know how much of it is in here. That's true. We don't know. We don't even know what it tastes like. But we're going to touch on that later. But I just wanted you to see this. Welcome back. And as I'm working my way to the first inch of the cigar, I'm getting notes of cedar. I'm getting cocoa hints. I'm getting a very earthy but balanced backbone. And, you know, I like the way that the cedar is kind of blending just right with the earthiness and the cocoa. But this is just the beginning, right? And it's hard to tell what a cigar is going to be like just from the first inch. You shouldn't judge it, but many of us do. And if I were to do that, I would probably say right now, it's tasting pretty good. It's earthier with those notes of cedar, and in the finish you get a little bit of leather. You get it stays on your tongue, as a matter of fact, just a little bit, but it's not prominent, right? Now let's talk about this cigar, because I've had it in the humidor now, I'm gonna say probably about 6 months, and I've been waiting for the right time to do a review on a cigar like this, because it's using a rarely used tobacco leaf from Spain. Now, most of Spain's tobacco is generally of the Virginian variety, and they import a lot. They import, of course, as you know, Cuban tobacco, Cuban cigars, and they import a lot of non-Cuban cigars. As a matter of fact, they are the second biggest market for Cuban cigars in the world, right behind China. And they're one of the biggest in Europe for non-Cuban cigars. What does that mean? That means that they're Nicaraguan tobacco lovers, Dominican tobacco lovers, a lot of them are in Spain. They look for the alternatives. They don't want to just smoke Cuban cigars because they have access to them. Because even though they do, they're still paying a lot of money for their Cuban cigars, like everyone else in the world is. And they're looking for alternatives, even if they have the opportunity to smoke Cuban all the time. So that's saying something for the non-Cuban market, right? Or as we know them, the New World tobaccos, the New World cigars. Spain is a big lover of the New World cigars. And just from how General Cigar introduced this cigar in naming it the Emissary, Espana, the Spanish, it's almost like the Spanish diplomat on a mission. But again, the reality is we don't know how much of the Spanish tobacco is actually in here. I can tell you that my palate is sensing a good amount of the Dominican Piloto Cubano. I'm also going to probably say that, yeah, a little bit of the pepper and the cedar that I'm getting, some of it is reminiscent of Nicaraguan tobacco when it's blended with Dominican tobacco. And let's see what the next puff holds. Some sweetness that comes through. Sweetness. Now, there's Colombian tobacco in here as well. I did a review on a Colombian puro, Mambo puro, and it was amazing. Amazing. From leaf, binder, fill, everything was Colombian and it was amazing. So I've said this in the past and I'll say it again. Colombian tobacco is heavily, severely underrated. It really is, because it is an incredible tobacco. You hear me rant and rant about Puerto Rican tobacco, and you've seen me do a slew of videos on Puerto Rican tobaccos and the farms in one of the farms in Puerto Rico. And I love to talk about rarely used tobaccos, right? And I love to dig up information on these tobaccos so that I can share that with you. I can share that information with you, and you can know when you see a certain blend, if you see a certain tobacco that you're not familiar with, you might say, well, I remember Jose of Backyard Cigars did a video on a cigar that had this component, and he spoke at length about the history. Perhaps I did. And in this case, Spain has a history of growing its own tobacco that dates back to the late 1800s, right? I mean, they've done it. I mentioned that, as of, the current moment, a lot of it is the Virginian variety. A lot of it is for cigarettes. Not much of it is for cigars, except perhaps that little small patch in Rio Lobos. And this is a tobacco that is of Havana Seed. Now, we've heard of these small crops popping up all over in making their way into blends. I mentioned CAO, but CAO did something where they used a little bit of Italian. So CAO Italia. And they used this Italian tobacco that was grown very close. And I actually looked up and I found pictures of the farm. It's a very small farm, probably a little smaller than the one I showed you earlier in Spain. And, it's not far from where their famous tomatoes are grown. And again, it was incorporated into that blend. And you're smoking it and you're like, I loved it, by the way. And you're thinking, Italian tobacco, what is it supposed to taste like? What flavor is it supposed to impart in the cigar? And I asked myself that same question with the Spanish tobacco here. We do know it's 10 years old, so it's old. We do know that more than likely at 10 years, it's going to be a mellowness that it brings to the cigar. It's going to bring a nice earthiness to it. What, in fact, is the flavor profile? I don't know. No one really knows. No one's talking about it. General Cigar hasn't talked about what the characteristics of the Spanish tobacco are. Is it similar to Cuban tobacco, like everybody says? It's almost like saying tastes like chicken. Everything is going to be compared to chicken. But there are things that are gamier than others. And certain things that are supposed to taste like chicken don't exactly taste like chicken, do they? I wouldn't say turkey tastes like chicken. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go as far as to say that Italian tobacco tasted like Cuban tobacco, though it was a Havana Seed as well. You can sense the aged tobaccos here. There's a refined, exquisite feeling to the way the smoke moves around and the flavors mingle, and you get a sense of the maturity of these tobaccos, and I like that, because it's taming any strength that it might have. Right now, it's a true medium bodied and strength cigar, but it's smooth and it has hints of pepper that are popping out right now, but it also has this sweetness to it. Yeah, for me, in my way of retrohaling, I get a nice cedar note with earth and a bit of pepper. And it's smooth and it's easy and it doesn't bother my nostrils one bit, which is always a plus for me. But what I like with a retrohale, with this cigar in particular, is that as you're pushing it out, you get the pepper up front, and then you get the nice earthiness and cedar and a little cocoa umped up, right? Because when you do a retrohale, you're basically you're tasting a little bit more than what you would normally taste, just a little bit more, and it's not something you have to do often or on every puff, but you do it every now and then to gauge the flavors and the strength. It's really something that a lot of cigar blenders and makers will employ in the tasting process when they are examining the strength in the body of their tobaccos before they use them in the blend. Not everybody does it, but to some degree they all do it in one way or another, because there's different ways of retrohaling. If you want to know more about that, you can always click on the links that I'm going to provide to let you know more about the retrohale. But back to the cigar, it pushes that pepper out, and then on the tail end of it, as it's leaving your nose, it does it again. And I like that. But again, this is an extra sensory type of thing that you get to enjoy. If there are people out there that are not retrohaling, you may be missing out on certain flavors, and I'm not gonna make you feel bad if you just don't want to do it or you can't do it for medical reasons. But you can still enjoy the cigar with other ways of retrohaling, improvised ways. Again, check out my video links on the retrohale. They're boring and long, but informative. Okay, enough about that. It's holding the ash very well. It's got a nice meaty smoke. It's got a very good aroma. Not an aroma to write home about, as I say often, but a good aroma. Yeah, so far I'm enjoying this cigar. At $14.99 a pop for the Robusto, you know, you might say they're charging a little more than what you would want to pay. But I think in this case, it's justified. Not because of the Spanish tobacco, but if anything, I love the addition of the Colombian tobacco. I do know what Colombian tobacco tastes like, and it does add sweetness. And we know the Dominican Piloto Cubano will add some sweetness as well with the cedar. And I just think that the blend is well thought out. I'm going to say that. Yeah, I'm liking this so far. I'm enjoying it. Right now I feel like it's a little creamier, and I'm getting a little bit of that a spicy cedar on the finish, and it's not a very strong spice. It's very subtle. Yeah, I'm gonna come right back and tell you more. In the 1920s to the 1930s, Spain was growing tobacco, but they were mainly importing more than they were exporting. And a lot of what they were exporting, well, here's a little clip from the Tobacco Weekly Trade Review. Exports from Spain are small and consist of manufactured products going to, for the most part, to Spanish possessions in Africa. Spain announced policy to displace imported tobaccos and substitute with homegrown tobaccos. They were importing a lot of KFC. No, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, but Kentucky fire-cured tobacco and the dark cured tobaccos, as was Italy, and a lot of the European countries in that area really fell in love with the Kentucky fire cured tobaccos. And of course, they had the monopoly for a long time on Cuba. And at this point in time, they're trying to implement the policy to just depend on what they're growing for cigars, for cigarettes, for everything. And a lot of people speculated that it was destined to fail. It's just, they just weren't growing enough to meet the demand. And the percentages were down. And that caused problems, because here you have a country that's trying to, say to its people, we're going to depend on our tobacco and cut down on the imports, but then you don't have enough to meet that demand. That's always going to present the problem. Now, by 1993, Spain's tobacco has declined in exports, and much of this can be attributed to the EU tobacco cap reform process. And that's a process which devalued the Spanish leaf and, of course, affected the bottom line, ultimately. So I'm not going to get into the bureaucracy of that cap reform, but I will say that this has happened in a lot of places. And you look at Canada. Canada was once a place that actually grew a lot of very, very good, high quality tobacco. And because of the political climate and laws against tobacco and smoking and so forth, the farming was reduced and the consumption declined and was discouraged. So things like this happen in certain regions that have the ability to grow tobacco, and not just grow tobacco, but grow very good tobacco. And then they still have a group of people who do purchase tobacco products, purchase cigars in this case, and have to depend on the imports, which are going to cost more. And that's just a given. But look, I won't get too much into that. We know that Spain is the second biggest market for Cuban tobaccos. We know that they're looking to expand in their palate. You have Spanish palates are very sophisticated. They have had some of the best Cuban tobacco that the world has seen. And along with England and a lot of other European countries that have had access to it. But they look at New World tobaccos and New World cigars as something that is delivering on its promise and is satisfying all of their palate's needs. You can age New World tobaccos. Some of them age very well. You can come up with very unique blends, and you can marry certain tobaccos. That marriage of Dominican and Nicaraguan tobacco, such a great marriage. Now with the additions of Brazilian tobacco, and not so much yet, but in the near future, more of the Puerto Rican tobacco, and of course the Colombian tobacco, which is being used in this blend along with Spanish tobacco. But do I think Spanish tobacco has the bright future that all of those other tobaccos have that I just mentioned? No, because it's like the Italian tobacco, it's too small a crop. Could they expand? General Cigar, Altadis, these are giants in the industry, and they have the ability to expand in a way that very few cigar makers do. Very few cigar companies can do what they do. There was a website, simplystogies.com, and they questioned whether this was more for hype than for actual smoking satisfaction, right? Well, I'm tremendously satisfied, so I'll say that. Check that box. But in terms of hype, yes, sure. I think this is hype. This is also something to get the adventurous cigar smokers to try the cigar. But I think that whether you're adventurous or not, if you get your hands on this or someone gives this to you, I think you're gonna appreciate it. Just what I'm saying right now is how I'm feeling right now. But yeah. Yeah, it's been a nice, pleasant smoke. Um, the flavors are not overly complex, despite the blend. But again, you're getting creaminess, you're getting sweetness, you're getting hints of cedar, hints of pepper, earthy backbone, you're getting cocoa. And I just think that a nice medium bodied, medium strength cigar like this has a place. So, what's the downside to the cigar? Other than the $15 price for this particular Robusto, they've got a few other uh, formats, vitolas, that are probably priced even higher. I think the Churchill might be $17.99, or the Toro might be $17.99 as well. They've got something of a Lancero as well. So they've got a couple of other shapes, and the prices vary. But other than that, are there any drawbacks? I would say probably say the finish is a little light, a little thin for me. It's not as thick and creamy and as voluptuous as I may want it to be. It is medium strength. I'm not saying a lack of strength is the problem here. I'm more likely just saying that the finish, it doesn't coat the palate. At least my palate doesn't sense it as much, and in a way that leaves the flavors on the palate a little longer, right? So it's a shorter finish, falls a little flat, and then you've got to, like, kind of go back to it to enjoy, to get that enjoyment, which happens with a lot of cigars, right? But I think with some cigars, they have a longer finish to them, and it just really coats the palate differently. I think here, probably because of the age of the cigars, but I'm not getting any mustiness or anything like that. Maybe some of the earthiness has a little mustiness to it, but it's a general earthiness. I don't sense anything that is telling me, this tobacco is past its prime because it's 10 years old or 6 years old. I mean, the binder itself is, I think, 6 years old. So these tobaccos are just refined, and you sense that. You do get that refinement. I think, but other than that, it's a fine cigar. I mean, I'm enjoying this particular size. I really have enjoyed it. Is it $15 worth? Well, that's up for you to decide if it's $15 worth. Like I said, I waited on a sale, and I got mine about $2 off. So this was $12.99 for me. And at that price, I was pretty happy with it. Some leather is present, and you're going to get it. But I like it. I like the way that the leather and the earth with the cedar and the pepper really come together. And then you had that moment in time when it was sweet, leaning towards creamy. So all of those things I liked. And so I've liked the transitions and the overall flavors that have been expressed in this particular line. So as I'm heading towards nub state, I'm just going to remove the band, which actually came off very easily. And that's where I'm at. It's a nice steady smoke. It doesn't burn too quickly, doesn't burn too long. Actually, I think it's burning appropriately. I mean, it's a 52 ring gauge. The Nicaraguan tobacco that is listed in the blend is Nicaraguan ASP. So, if I'm correct, Nicaraguan ASP would represent Nicaraguan tobacco grown and sold by ASP Enterprises in Esteli. And they sell a lot of Nicaraguan tobacco to a lot of different brands. So I'm sure most of us, even without knowing, have had ASP Nicaraguan tobacco, which is phenomenal, right? It's top notch. But they make a point of letting us know that that's where they're getting it from. And the binder from Condega. Now, SimplyStogies.com also mentioned how it doesn't make sense to grow tobacco near areas that you are growing, whether you're growing olives, whether you're growing tomatoes, or the other thing they mentioned, because of the insects that would be attracted to your tobacco crop that are attracted to the other crops. And to that, I would say it's a good point. It's a good point. And I guess that's where you have to come in with the pesticides and constant inspection. And of course, you're also growing a much smaller crop, so you're not tending to a huge crop. So that plays a role in it. Just lower this. And perhaps that allows them to micromanage any potential problems with insects. But as for it not making sense, well, I mean, you grow where you can grow. And you have the region, in Spain's case, this is the region where they grow most of their tobacco, where they feel the best quality is going to be expressed in their tobacco crops. So it is what it is. In Italy, like I mentioned, not far from where the tomatoes were, right? But still very good tobacco. I thought it was. So yeah, there's hype in the whole Spanish 10-year-old Spanish Havana Seed tobacco in here. But if you're gonna say come for the 10-year-old very small amount of Spanish tobacco in the cigar and stay for the incredible Dominican and Nicaraguan tobaccos that they're using, along with the big bonus treat of Colombian tobacco. Again, we don't know how much of what is in the blend. We know that it's in the blend. That's all we know. And you can take it at face value. It's like when you buy one of those cigars that has the Camacho pre-embargo and it has a small percentage of Cuban tobacco in the cigar. It might just be just a sprinkle. I've seen it happen. I've seen it done. Where some of these cigars are crafted. I was behind one particular cigar that I took to Martinez Cigar, and I had old pre-embargo Cuban tobacco, short filler at that. And it was used for, I don't know, 20 cigars, something like that, maybe less. And in a Robusto Vitola. And the blender was just adding very small amounts of the Cuban tobacco. It imparted a flavor in the cigar. I could tell the difference. During the process of the blending, I was able to tell the difference and see how much of a difference was made with the addition of this pre-embargo tobacco. And the more we used of it, the better the cigar was with the Dominican tobacco that it was being used with. And so with this blend, even if it's a small amount, let's just say, it could still be benefiting the overall profile of the cigar. Only the blender would know. Only he would be able to break that down to us and tell us how exactly the flavor profile was achieved. And that's just something that a lot of blenders don't share. And if they do share, they don't go into great detail about it. They don't want their secrets stolen, their recipes copied. But in this case, it's hard to copy something like this, right? You can get some tobacco from Spain and perhaps it'll be good quality, but this is a specific crop that is being grown to the utmost in quality for the purpose of this line. And it's what draws you in, it's what intrigues you, it's what makes you look at it. But then again, the cigar still has to deliver, and that it has. Now in the final third, it's earthier, and the pepper and the cedar are still, on the finish, sticking around a lot longer. The finish is a little longer now, and as well as some of the sweetness is still there in the back, and you have the pepper and the cedar just booming, but ever so lightly, because again, with these aged tobaccos, you're not going to get that robustness that you would get from an AJ Fernandez Nicaragua. You're not going to get that. And that's fine. That's fine, because that was not what was intended here. But you get enough strength, I think, to satisfy a person that might say, well, I need a little kick to my cigar. I need a little strength. And this is not your typical Macanudo. It's not. And from the very beginning, that was apparent. And even more so now, in just the way it is. But there is a certain DNA to the blending process that I can pick up on that tells me the general cigar DNA. But at the same time, I can tell that it's a little out of the box. It's different, right? And I think that's a good thing. I know it's a big company. A lot of people say, well, they don't make the greatest cigars and they make a lot of crap and they copy a lot of Cuban brands and this and that. And yeah, they've had some stinkers over the years. Who hasn't? Well, not everyone has, but a lot of people have. And I just think that see it for what it is. I'd give it a shot. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say thank you for watching this episode of Backyard Cigars. We didn't go into the long history of Spain's tobacco because there wasn't much to it in that sense, unless you're aligning it with the rich tradition of Cuban tobacco and Cuban cigars that have come out of Spain and that have been under the control of Spain for a long time back in the day. And even till today, they still have a lot of Cuban roots in their tobacco culture because that is what people smoked, right? And now just to see this happening with this small little crop, we don't know where it's going to go, where it's going to lead to. We know this is regular production now. How much of it do they have? They probably have a good amount of it. Simply Stogies, which I found the article on the site very interesting, and did a very good report on it. They speculated about how much of this old tobacco they have laying around. Well, they've got plenty. This is General Cigar, and they've got plenty, and they can spread it around, and they don't have to use a lot of it initially. And who knows where it would lead to if in the future. When I think of Spanish tobacco, just for the record, I think of the Canary Islands. That is what I think of in regards to Spanish tobacco. And that was really their heyday. That was their legacy, with the Canary Islands producing tobacco that was near the quality of Cuban tobacco, with a lot of Cuban growers there. And of course, these pre-embargo Canary Island cigars were a smashing success. And a lot of people loved them. And the Canary Islands still has a pretty heavy tobacco culture where they sell a lot of really good cigars. And people go there as tourists and they enjoy the cigars there. Padron makes special cigars for them as well, I believe. And so that's what I think of when I think of Spanish tobacco from the Canary Islands. But, and I've had it, and I can tell you it's delicious. But this is something different. And yeah, rich smoke, meaty now, pepper on the tongue, Cedar still sharp. Hints of cocoa in and out. Mild sweetness. Most of the sweetness is dissipated. And just a good strength to it now on the nub. And really pleasing, man. I mean, what can I tell you? Thank you so much for watching once again. Until next time on Backyard Cigars.